One is on-farm decentralized, like tricot, where farmers test the varieties at their own condition in their own fields. And the other one is a group-based, centralized type of testing. And this can happen on station, on a field trial, or it can happen at a farmer field centrally located, where every farmer, goes and make the evaluation. And of course, whether I am dealing with the variety in my farm on my plot, or whether I'm doing this in a group-based setting, it is different, right? It is different for the way I am perceiving the variety, because in one case I can quote unquote play with it and test it in the ground, and in the other case I can just observe it. But it's also different because there are different interaction happening both among farmers and among farmers and scientists. So we ask, what are these differences? And quite surprisingly, there aren't many studies doing this. There's a lot of studies trying to study, doing research, around the benefits of each of them. So there's a lot of studies on group-based or participatory varietal selection that do studies around what are the benefits of PVS in terms of food security or, diversification and so on and so forth. There's a lot of studies on tricot, as you might know very well, but studies comparing the two methods, not so many. So we are one of the first to do this, and we try to focus on two specific impacts: on-farm varietal diversification and food security. And we do this among bean growing households in Central America, especially in the Trifinio area, which is a cross-border region between Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. I'm spoiling the results in case I go over time, which I tend to do. So we find similar level of varietal diversification. Both decentralized and centralized testing seem to be good at actually improving people access and usage of different varieties. But the group-based centralized approach, the more traditional PVS, seem to boost more significantly household food security. And we explain this inside of the higher and more frequent interaction between farmers and scientists. Of course, we find trade-off, and one of this is that it comes at a higher attrition. So it's I'm going to discuss at the end of the presentation what are the pros and cons of what we find. So I'm not going to spend too much time. You are all familiar with the two approaches, but just in case you are not, the on-farm decentralized testing is in our paper represented by tricot. So there are 3 varieties randomly chosen, which are tested at farmer fields and farmer condition, in this case, 3 common bean varieties. And then there is the group-based testing or participatory varietal selection, which is kind of the gold standard before more decentralized approaches like tricot see the light. And this means that there's a group of participants, of farmers, gather on a common plot. In our specific experiment, established in the village, it could also be on station. And these farmers were asked to observe and evaluate a higher number of bean varieties, around 20. And farmers evaluated the varieties by expressing their preferences simultaneously. So you walk into the field, you observe, do you like, how do you rate this variety in terms of height? And then everyone votes. That's more or less the idea. While on tricot, you have the time on season to experiment with the variety, and there are different data collection moments for the traits. If you have any other question on the differences, more technical, I'm happy to go deeper in the question and answer session. But from a socioeconomic point of view, as a social scientist, beyond the fact that in one case you are exposed to 3 varieties randomly chosen, and in the other case you are exposed to the full set of varieties, there are other differences that we are seeing. In one case, for example, time required to farmers for in-person meetings and training is way lower. When you do something decentralized like tricot, you usually don't have many group gatherings. That's the whole point. And this is different in group-based varietal testing. Of course, the degree of centralization is different, as the name suggests, and also the possibility to do follow-up is different. One of the philosophy of tricot is to kind of let the farmer do his thing or her thing without, a lot of scientist intervention. In case of participatory varietal selection or other type of group-based varietal testing, the philosophy is exactly the contrary. There's a lot of training. I mentioned here agronomic management because this was specific to the project that was implemented with common bean in Central America, but there could be also other types of training, for example, on inputs and fertilizer, which generally goes hand in hand with the group-based varietal testing, but we don't have a lot of that in at least the traditional form of tricot. The number of varieties evaluated is very different. The group-based varietal testing participants get exposed to all the variety at the same time, while the farmer participating in tricot get exposed to a randomly assigned number of 3 varieties, usually. And of course, the cost of the approach is very different. We know with tricot that you can engage way more farmers in way different locations, using way different management solutions at a lower cost, because you don't have to bring everyone in a central location and do so many in-person meetings. So that's a little bit, some other differences beyond the more centralized, decentralized type of nature of the experiment. So why do we think this matters at the end of the story? The objective of a variety testing experiment is to test the variety, right? We are asking something more. We are asking this experiment and this evaluation to also have effect on on-farm varietal diversification and food security, but that's 3 steps ahead, right? The objective of doing tricot or doing participatory varietal selection is to test new varieties and understand what farmers like and what farmers don't like. And it's already quite difficult to do that. So why would we want to see if there's any benefit long term? So our hypothesis, which I'm summarizing in this very simple conceptual framing, is that participants sorry for the word game, in this type of experiment, they also interact with one another and they receive way more benefit than being exposed to the variety itself and potentially growing that variety if they like it at the end of the experiment. So in terms of tricot, what they gain, it's experience with the variety and a higher accuracy of variety testing. In the group-based participatory varietal selection, what they gain is training in addition and peer learning in addition to evaluating some of the varieties. And we hypothesize that both this channel, either intervening through adoption or yield, they land higher on-farm varietal diversity and better food security. However, as we were saying, these are variety testing approaches. These are not extension services or delivery services. So at the end of the story, there's the delivery of the preferred variety, which is independent in most of the cases from the own experiment of the tricot of the participatory varietal selection that might interfere with this. So farmers might attend, get a lot of benefit, have a lot of peer learning or scientist-farmer learning, but then at the end of the story, the delivery of preferred variety doesn't happen because there's mixed up in the middle. So do we actually see these benefits happening or not? And I have to briefly say that for the paper, for some reason, we chose this very complex acronym, but tricot CCS is the traditional form of tricot, and GB-PBS is the group-based participatory varietal selection. So when you're going to see that, you have to imagine tricot on one hand and PBS on the other hand, even though, you know, it can be any type of decentralized or decentralized testing. So, as I said, data were collected in Central America, in Trifinio. It was a two-stage random sampling, which resulted in approximately 2,000 households. You can see them pictured here on the map. And as I was saying, these are pretty old data. We collected the baseline in 2015 and the end line in 2018. And together with the evaluation of the varieties, there was also the ROMIS survey done. And you might be probably familiar with that, but that's a multi-indicator survey, and this stands for Rural Household Multiple Indicator Survey, or ROMIS. In the table, you can see the division between group-based, those households that attended group-based centralized testing, those that attended on-farm decentralized testing, or tricot. And then we had a couple of some households that were not attending anything, but we still collected data in villages that had no experiment going on, while we had some households that were not attending any participatory varietal testing approach, but they were in a village where the testing was happening, either in the form of the PVS or in the form of tricot. So we were also interested in any possible spillover effect. The outcome variable are fairly easily calculated. We didn't go too fancy. We have the on-farm bean diversification. It was either a variety count and a variety richness index. We have both. The variety richness index, it's a Shannon index on diversity for the common bean. And we focus here on bean diversification, so common bean only. And the food security is the household hunger scale. You might be familiar with it. It's a fairly standard scale developed by the World Bank. And we use that because, as you have seen, we work across 3 countries, and the household hunger scale works particularly well when you are comparing different contexts. We're very much interested in the attrition. We think that's a very important part. When you do participatory work, are the people actually participating? And what we were you can have, different type of attrition. It can be project-induced attrition when you have some difficulties in reaching, for example, tricot farmers. But what we are specifically interested into is the self-induced attrition rate. So if I am participating in the experiment, is there any point when I decide to drop out? And this can very well happen for tricot in the middle of the growing season, or for the group PVS, the participatory varietal selection. The estimation strategy is fairly simple. We have an instrumental variable difference in difference specification with inverse probability weighting. We used exactly the methods of Ogutu and co-authors in 2020. I think it's published in Word Development, openly available. And what we do is we are specifically interested in the treatment on the treated. So our instrument is basically the attendance of the experiment. Okay, on to the results before I conclude. So as I was saying, the 2 approaches lead to similar effects on farm varietal diversification. T1 is the group-based, so the participatory varietal selection. T2 is the on-farm, in our case, the tricot. The first stage is strong and robust. the weak instrument hypothesis is rejected. This is the number of observation. The model fit metric isn't really good, but it is to be expected given that most of these are categorical variables or account models. And what we find is that even though, and remember, we collected the data in 2015 and 2018, so we are comparing baseline and endline estimates on an experiment which per se had, had the objective of testing new varieties, not really to enhance any socioeconomic variable of the participants. Anyway, what we observe is that we see a positive impact with respect to control farmers in control villages, and we observe this when we express it in terms of variety richness index or in terms of bean variety count index. If we compare these estimates for control in treated villages, so treated farmers and control in treated villages, we see differences only for the variety richness index of the group-based treatment, but not for the on-farm treatment. Anyway, similar approaches. There's something there, even though the objective of the variety testing approach isn't exactly this one. But what we find very interesting is the effect on food security. The effect on food security in both cases, when compared to control farmers in control villages, so those villages where nothing was happening at all, we see that there isn't really a significant effect. After 3 years, those who attended either participatory varietal selection testing or tricot just simply for the fact of attending one of these two methods didn't really have a lot of differences. But when we compare this with farmers which are control in treated villages, so neighboring farmers, but that did not attend the experiment, the participatory variety testing, we keep seeing no differences in terms of on-farm testing, but we do see quite some striking difference in terms of household hunger score index in terms of those that attended the group-based. And remember, the household hunger score index is the higher you go, the higher you go in the index, the more food insecure you are. So a reduction is actually a good thing. And this is with neighboring farmers in the same village that did not attend the group-based experiment or participatory varietal selection. However, when we look at self-induced attrition rate, so those farmers that drop the experiment, we see that group-based has a way higher probability, group-based participant has a way higher probability to attrit, to leave the experiment with respect to on-farm participant or tricot participant. So to conclude, this was the first study to compare the two effects, and what we find is that consistent with our hypothesis, the peer learning and farmer-scientist interaction on elements which go beyond the pure variety testing, such as agronomic training, which are present in the group-based type of approach, have higher coefficient for food security, or food insecurity coefficient decreases. And it gets way more significant the more session participants decide to attend, because we also had data on how many sessions they attended, and we see this coefficient being significant, the more session the participant attended. So this really, there was really some elements of learning that at the end of the story translated in bigger lessons that led to higher food security. However, an important consequences of those exchanges was, of course, the time commitment that farmers and technical staff and scientists put into that. So as we saw, the attrition was way, way higher and very significant. So there's, of course, a trade-off. There are higher socioeconomic benefit, especially in terms of food security, when you interact more with the knowledge exchange, at the expenses of engaging less and having more attrition. So what does it mean when you develop a new variety, which is actually the overall objective of the variety testing approaches, it means that probably you integrate a potential bias. And again, in terms of varietal diversification, there were really no differences in the two outcomes. So that was achieved both with decentralized and centralized approach. I promised I would stay in 20 minutes. I went slightly over time. I'm sorry for that, but I am really happy that you stick with it, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martina. And I'm glad you spent the extra time to interpret those results, because we needed the interpretation. Definitely.
Good.
But it's very, very good, interesting study that you've done with your colleagues, and I'm sure we'll have some questions coming from the group. Who would like to start? Please raise your hand, your virtual hand, which if you just go to react on the bottom of the screen and click on it, you'll find the hand, raise hand button. While we're waiting, I'm just a bit curious if you were surprised on this difference in household security being higher for the group-based selection.
Yeah, I was. I think it's an interesting exercise, right? Why would something that relates to variety testing have a longer effect? And here we are seeing 3 years. We're seeing basically 3 years lag. So a couple of seasons. Some cases they can have 2 seasons in a year. So I was surprised to see the difference. It was I work on farmers' knowledge and farmer scientist interaction, and I've seen it has benefits in the short term, especially in terms of how farmers might be more aware about the varieties that they grow, or reciprocal learning, also in terms of scientists and their target product profile. But I wasn't expecting to see an effect 3 years later on food security. That was a little bit surprising. While I was pretty much betting on the attrition, because that has been a big factor.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question from Jakob. Go ahead and unmute, and oh, there's your camera. We see, there you are.
Camera issue here.
Okay.
Thanks, Martina. Great study, of course, and I'm still happy with it.
That's good.
After 3 years, 3 year on. So no attrition there. Yeah, what I wondered, so we've done this in Trifinio, very intensive study. Like an RCT is always expensive, a lot of data, a lot of organization. Like you, from the beginning of the trial, you plan to do this study, so that's why it's so rigorous and why the results are so important. What do you suggest for future studies to do more of this? Like this is of course only for beans in Trifinio, where actually adoption was not very, very high as well. So and that's of course something you cannot plan for. We didn't know if adoption was going to be high. The beans that we used were bred for like regional adaptation. So in theory, we would expect that they would find some adoption. It was still quite low. In spite of that, we found these very interesting findings. So that's okay. So there was enough, they were attractive enough. What do you think we could be doing without entering into like super expensive RCTs in many countries, which would be very maybe too big of a hammer? what kind of studies could we do that kind of follow up from this and that would also check if the same effect is present with other crops? In that tricot works well and gets us the good signal.
Right. No, I think that's a very interesting question. I've been experimenting a lot as of recently with photo, and I was briefly mentioning this to Rachel at the beginning of the call, with photo voice and tricot. And I think that could be a good way to, without, knowing that the participatory varietal selection approach has the advantage of allowing more peer learning by design, or we don't know more peer learning, because it could be very well the tricot farmers in the same village do interact as well, right? So we know that it's easier to capture the learning in group-based because they attend the training and then you have an easy variable to do that. I think a very powerful way could be to attach to tricot the small module, allowing the farmers to reflect on their experiences with the tricot. And I think that might not be as rigorous as agricultural economists usually like, but that would tell us a wealth of stories around, is tricot really getting farmers to think differently, or I'm think more systematically about the varieties that they grow. I'm doing this experiment on sorghum here on this plot. Is this having any other effect on the way I evaluate the other varieties or potentially other crops I'm growing in the field next to it? Because at the end of the story, the farmers interact with varieties every day, and they have, a wealth of. I would be very interested into that. Like if we could use that and leverage, the survey instrument you anyway have running in a tricot experiment, I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah. So actually making it routine, so to say, to evaluate. We also have this idea of actually fostering more group-based learning by encouraging farmers to visit one or two other plots and also reflect and compare, actually to report back on that.
Right.
Maybe we can get something like an intermediate effect there where you don't say, okay, it's super organized by groups, but still you have peer learning happening and actually getting information from that back as well.
Right,
So
absolutely.
why is this variety, you like it, I don't like it? Let's explain that as well. And that could give very interesting qualitative information that you don't get from a single farm, but that you would get if you have farmers comparing their experiences.
Right. And it's also a matter of how you grow it. Like I've been growing this variety in this way for a long time. Maybe when I visit your tricot plot, I see that and there's a lot of peer learning exchanging possibilities already
in management, indeed. Yeah.
Right. And there are a lot of peer learning exchanging possibilities already happening. I mean, when I talk about with farmers in Italy, it's not that they have to wait for scientists to tell them to talk to one another. So I just think we have to capture this in the data better with tricot.
Yes, yeah, farmers do this already, so encouraging them, it would not be, but maybe, yeah, it's more about giving a format to retrieve those conversations.
Right.
Well, this is an interesting segue, interesting segue to the next webinar, Jakob, because Anna and Juan Manuel will be talking about farmer feedback in 2 weeks. And so that could be a mechanism for getting that kind of information from Martina.
Yes,
Wonderful.
great. So everybody should stay tuned and be attending the next one as well.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the floor? Don't be shy. Put Martina to the test. A very quiet group today. Okay. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Just wanted to remind you that this will be recorded this has been recorded, and I was a bit late with it, but I think I got most of the good bits. Sorry about that. Just to remind you about our Thousand Farms resources, our website, social media channels, and then the community website. The last link there is where you can find all of our recorded webinars and much, much more. So please go to that site and become a member. You'll get interesting news from time to time and be able to interact with other people working on tricot and on-farm testing. So those are the resources available to you. And just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody for joining. Another great presentation. Thank you so much, Martina.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great perspective on the different approaches. Really, really interesting. We put the link to the paper in the chat. I'll also put it with the video on the community website. So thanks very much. And please tune in 2 weeks for our next webinar. You'll receive an invitation for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.